Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This is my Sunday morning chat on Monday. I didn't do a video yesterday. Just busy with daughter down for the weekend and it didn't get done, basically. It happens. So we do it now. I thought I'd have a chat about plants generally looking dehydrated, seem to be going downhill. Not necessarily quickly, but we can come to that in a minute. Now, your first obvious answer is you're not giving it enough water. And quite honestly, that will be the least possible reason. I'm going to show you something horrible, but it's an example. This is waiting to be thrown out. Do those canes look totally dehydrated and desiccated? No. That's got a lousy root system, and that's been sat on the dining room table for 3 weeks, waiting to be thrown out. I just haven't got round to it. It's not in my way, it just sort of sits there, lurking. That's had no water and been in a dry house atmosphere for 3 weeks. It's not dead. It's not even dying. Yeah? So the least problem will be you're not giving something enough water. You can almost write that off. Orchids can survive a hell of a long time without any water. But what they won't survive is being too wet when they're not supposed to be. Now, I have to add that bit in, yes, because there are times when orchids just can be soaking wet all the time. But not that many orchids like that environment, and not many will survive it over a prolonged period, yeah? So, you get people, I've got to go away for a week. Well, if you've got a lot of mounts, then yes, you've probably got a problem. But I bet your stuff in pots will be fine. Yeah? All you need to do if you're going away and leaving your orchids for any length of time and nobody can give them a drink and all that sort of stuff, is just get them somewhere as cool as you can and heavily shaded. Get them out the light. Hello, pussycat. Pussycats. What you doing then? Don't see him out here very often. Oh, soppy cat. Yes, so just get them out of the light, basically. And they won't need as much water if they're not in bright light for a start. So they'll last longer. But unless you're in real serious heat, then, somewhere in the UK sort of thing, just get the shade netting doubled up or get them away from the light and give them a good water before you go, and I'm sure they'll be fine. Panic not. I've got a break coming up to go to Malvern, and I'll be leaving on Thursday, getting back on Sunday. My daughter's going to come down for that sort of period because she doesn't want to go to Malvern this year, so she's going to come down to look after the cats and my orchids. And all she'll need to do is water my mounts. And I've said, if you don't want to get them down and actually water them, just use the sprayer. Yeah, it'll give them enough hydration over that short period of time. It won't be a problem. And the pots won't need touching. They'll be fine over a period like that. I'll make sure stuff's watered before I go. So, watering your plants is geared up to what the plant needs. Not year on, year out. What does it need now? What's it actually doing now? And if the answer is, well, it's not actually doing anything, there's no sort of new growths there, I've got no spikes coming, well, it's not going to need a lot of water then, because it's not going to use it. Plants need the extra water. Obviously feed's included as there, but I don't want to touch on feed. This is just about hydration, yeah? When something's going on, they will need more hydration. Now, that's your bit. Know your plants. Look at your plants. And if you're watering a set of plants and, this one's got some lovely new growth, water. Oh, this one's coming on. Oh, new root system as well, water. This one's not doing much at the moment. You might want to give it a miss and get it next time round, yeah? One of the worst things that can happen that dehydrates plants more than anything is loss of a root system. You can't hydrate the flipping thing if you've lost your root system. And the biggest reason for root loss is soggy pots, or breaking down media, because they go together. When your organic media starts to break down, it will retain water much, much better than it used to do when it was fresh, and it'll hold it for a long time. And over the time, as it's breaking down, it'll start to compact more, shutting out a lot of the air that used to be there, and that's replaced by moisture. So soggy pot. Yeah. So when you come into watering your plants, first question is, does this plant need an absolute soaking today? Or should I just be giving it enough to keep it hydrated when it's not growing? Most orchids will have a period where they're doing absolutely nothing. They're just sitting there, quietly. Not dormant, I mean, some of my dendrobiums in the winter time are in effect dormant. They're doing absolutely nothing. But what they are doing is reacting to the change to get ready for blooming. So there's thoughts going on, if you can imagine plants actually have thoughts, but there's trigger mechanisms going on. You've dramatically increased the light, yeah? So it's going to react to that. You've withheld your feed for a while. It's not getting anywhere near as much water, and the temperatures have dropped down. It's going to react to that, and it's going to think, I think I ought to start blooming around now, and it'll start thinking about pushing some buds. And this takes time. It's not an overnight decision. And then, slowly but surely it'll respond. The buds will start, and okay, you've got a totally leafless plant. Let's take we'll take Nesta as it happens to be in bloom, and it's something nice to look at the moment. Once that got into full winter, during the autumn, towards the end of October right through into December, it dumped all the leaves that it had, so that there were none left. So it's a totally leafless plant. How much water would that need, irrespective of whether it was a winter rester? The answer is next to none. Just enough to stop it dehydrating and desiccating, shriveling up the canes, yeah? So that's it. It doesn't need anything else. It's not doing anything. And then you see these buds starting to swell, and they're little nubbins at first. The goodness in the canes, stored up energy and food reserves, is plenty to actually start those buds into growth. But in my book, as soon as those buds leave the cane and start forming a stem, that's proper growth now. I don't care whether it's leaves or blooms, it's growth. Something's now happening. So it's going to use a bit more, so we can start introducing a bit of water. And with me, as soon as I start seeing buds on one of my resting dendrobiums, I start introducing feed. Now in the books it'll say start feeding and watering when you see new growths. Well, if I waited for that new growth up there on Nesta, these blooms would have had to do it all on their own, because that new growth has only just started. Yeah, so look at your plant, try and understand your plant's needs. And even an Oncidium can still have a period where it's not actually growing at the moment. And don't get me wrong, that might not be because it's the middle of winter. It could stop growing because it's too flipping hot and the days are too long, right in the middle of summer. And you think, why's my plant stopped growing? It's because the conditions aren't right for it. It can't cope with it, so it starts to shut down for a bit. It's not dying, it's just not right, if you see what I mean. So what's your watering? I would think that watering or not, that decision is more important than actually where you keep your flipping plant. Because a lot of orchids are pretty adaptable. They'll actually survive, and some will even bloom reasonably well in less than ideal conditions. Excuse me. But if you get the watering wrong, you will affect the plant far more adversely than perhaps it being a bit too warm or a bit too cool. It'll put up with that. Most will, anyway. There's very few orchids that are going to be generally available in collections that are totally intolerant of an environment that's even slightly off. They're not like that. They'll put up with stuff. You know, they'll put up with being a bit too warm. But then, you know, if it's going to be a bit too warm for a set of plants, then some extra humidity will probably keep them going. I mean, I get plants that slow down when it gets warm, because they're cool growers. And then I get plants that slow down when it gets cool, because they're warm growers, like my Vandas. They slow right down in the winter. A lot of the roots stop growing. Leaves slow down to a snail's pace. It's too cold for them. They don't like it. So they just slow down. They don't shut down, they just slow right down. So watch your watering. I think it's probably the single most thing involved with looking after orchids that can mess them up, more than anything. And next to that, or alongside it, because they go together for me anyway, is just leaving plants in organic media too long. Yeah? Don't be frightened of repotting your plants. You should get at least an annual opportunity with virtually every type of orchid. And some, you get an opportunity anytime you like. But things like cattleyas, you know, they're going to push up. They should be pushing up at least one new growth a year. And when you get to know your plant, you'll know that on this cattleya, it pushes up a new growth. And when it's a couple of inches long, the new roots start. Repotting time, if you need to. But it's the opportunity has arisen, so it gives you the choice. And you're better off, quite honestly, if in doubt, do it, rather than leave it until the next time that opportunity comes up, because that could be a year away. You know, and your media could go downhill a lot in a year, especially if that's through the summer period when you're chucking water on it left, right and centre, because it's, you know, it's growing that growth where you missed your opportunity. So watch out for your opportunities. All the dendrobiums, all the types of dendrobiums, they will have a period when their root systems come into active growth. And anytime you see it, we all go whoopee when we see a new root system starting. We love it. We like our roots. Well, they're telling you something. They're telling you, if you need to, now's the time to repot me. Yeah? And then you'll get other types of plants, things like perhaps Masdevallias. Well, they're pushing out roots almost continuously. You know, well, your opportunities anytime you like, really, but it's better to choose a season where the plant is at its best. Now, my Masdevallias are probably best in late autumn through to early spring, because that's when it's the coolest. And now that I've got additional lighting, they don't get the ridiculously short days, which slows them down. Even though they're cool growers, without the light, they slow down. And if they slow down, they're not using as much water. It's just the thing that once you get this, you don't even think about it. You know, you think, right, I'll water that shelf of plants today. And so you pick the plant up and you think, oh, that's coming on nicely. And you water it, you know, and either put it to one side or put it back. And you pick another one up. This one's not doing much at the moment. That pot's still a bit damp. We'll just put that one back. As I said, there are so few orchids die from too little water. So just look at your plants. Think about, what is my plant doing? Not the set of plants, because in amongst that set there could be all sorts of different situations going on. I mean, I've got a cattleyas up here with maturing growths, brand new shiny ones, some putting out new growths and new roots, some with advanced new growths heading for maturity that still haven't started new roots yet. But watch for those opportunities, especially if you've got a plant that dislikes root disturbance. One that springs to mind is my Psychopsis. That does not like being disturbed, but I've had to do it. Not only have I had to do it, but when I did it, I didn't have a good root system, so I'm almost starting from scratch. But I'm starting that plant from scratch. It did have a few roots at its best possible time, because this is when the light's right and it's at its warmest. It's a warm grower. It might be an Oncidium type in a distant memory, but it's a warm grower. Yeah, I mean, a Miltoniopsis is an Oncidium type, but they don't like it warm. So even in the same sort of alliances, you can get warmer and cooler plants. Some Masdevallias are quite heat tolerant and they'll put up with quite a bit of warmth, and others will keel over. They just don't like it. So you've got to get to know your plants. But I'm pleased with my Psychopsis. It's got tatty little leaves. It's an ugly plant, that's why it's hidden in there, so I don't have to look at it. But it does that. So I'm prepared to put up with the ugly plant because of the beauty that appears at the top of it. So, yeah. Anyway, concentrate on your watering. We're coming into, certainly in the UK, what I would call the main growing season. It's started already, yeah? And so plants may need watering a bit more frequently, yeah? Instead of giving them just a little drink, they might need a soak. You might actually need to start standing pots in your water and feed or whatever for an amount of time. My Cattleyas in the holy clay pots, it would do them absolutely no harm at all to actually just sink those pots in a bucket and leave them to soak for half an hour. It'd probably do them the world of good, yeah? Because they're still going to dry pretty quick, but I would get a lot more moisture absorbed into the bark because the bark's quite hard if I left them to soak. Alternative, water them more frequently. Yeah, so there's choices, always choices. A pot that's got bark and moss, small bark and moss, you pour quite a bit of water into there and it'll hold on to that for a while because of the moss and the small bark. It does break down quicker, but that's not what I'm really getting at. The small bark absorbs more water for the size of the piece of bark, if you see what I mean. Because they're small, smaller surface area, they just absorb water and hold it better. That's why you tend to use the small bark, with or without the moss, for things that like to stay moist a bit longer. Things that like to dry quite quickly, big chunky bark, lots of air, Cattleyas, for example, and holy pots to go with it. So yeah, you've got to think about what you're potting your plant in because of its needs. Yeah, and a plant that can have a period like this thing here and the giant behind it, these are Oncidium types that are incredibly vigorous. Not all Oncidiums are, but these two are. Yeah, so there will be a period where these are going to drink like hell. Yeah, and anybody who was doing the sort of inorganic stuff, the leca beads and stuff like that, during that sort of period, they shouldn't dry out at all. They should always have access to moisture. You know, this lot over here, that's all new growth there, and it's chucking out a hell of a root system in underneath that. That needs to stay moist. And what else is it going to need if it's chucking out that amount of growth? Feed. Don't starve your plants. But there again with your feeding regime, don't starve your plants, but don't overdo it, because what does overdosing do with your feed? It can damage plant structures, but the first thing that will probably happen is it will deck your root system. Because you start getting a bit of chemical burn on your roots and then they cease to function, and then we're back to where we were when I started. My plant's dehydrating and I don't know why. I give it lots of water and feed, yeah? So think of your plant. What's my plant doing? And if it's moving, if it's growing stuff, then it's going to need keeping moist or at least watering and drying quicker, yeah? But, you know, a plant that's sitting there having a rest period, you know, like a Cattleya can do that, can have a nice blooming and everything like that, and then it will go a couple of months quiet. There's no new growths, no new roots, and it's finished blooming. It's just sitting there doing absolutely nothing. Does it need to be kept soaking wet? No. So that's all this is geared up to. It's just think logically about your plants. Chuck your calendar away. Chuck your diary away where it comes to Monday and says, Monday, water all plants. Well, what if you've had a really dull week with no sunshine? Some of those pots could still be blinking wet from your previous time you turned up that diary page and it said water all my plants. So chuck your calendar away. Try to get to know your plants and the effect that weather, heat, day lengths can have on your watering frequency. Not necessarily how you water, just when. As I said, more plants, more orchids die. I won't call it overwatering. I refuse to use that expression. But they die from being watered too often. Yeah? Because when you water a plant, you water it. You know, you either water it or you don't, yeah? So it is not over-watering. You haven't given it too much water that time round, but what you've done is given it some more when it didn't need any. Soggy pot. So have a think about that sort of thing. That was going to be my Sunday morning chat that didn't get done, but it's been done on a Monday. You know, it's the same as everything in bloom on the 8th. That's been done on the 7th and the 9th. It's not the end of the world. The orchids will still carry on growing. The world will still keep turning. The universe will keep expanding. So thanks for dropping by, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.